The night my daughter walked down the aisle, I was standing at the back of the church holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, watching a man I didn't trust smile at my child like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever said. His name was Nathan Briggs. She'd known him 8 months. I'd known something was wrong in 4. My daughter's name is Sophie. She's 31 years old, runs half marathons on weekends, laughs too loud at her own jokes, and has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and, apparently, her mother's blind spot when it comes to men who know exactly what to say at exactly the right moment. Her mother, God rest her soul, figured it out eventually. I just prayed Sophie wouldn't need as long. I'm 63 years old. I built Calloway Tile and Stone from a 2-truck operation out of a rented warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, into a regional supplier with contracts across the Midwest. 31 years. The kind of business you don't build without learning to read people fast, because the ones who smile the widest are usually the ones checking your pockets while they do it. Nathan smiled a lot. I met him on a Thursday evening in late October at the Italian restaurant Sophie picked because she said it was his favorite, which already told me something, that in 8 months his preferences had become the geography of their relationship. He was 43 years old, which he mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, each time with a self-deprecating laugh, the way men do when they want you to admire how comfortable they are with facts they're actually not comfortable with at all. Broad shoulders, firm handshake, the kind of haircut that costs more than my first truck payment. He asked about the business immediately, not the way curious people ask, the way buyers ask when they already know the answer and want to see if you'll volunteer more. So you supply tile regionally? What's your distribution radius these days? I told him we covered Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and parts of Michigan. He nodded like he was filing something away. And Sophie tells me you're still running it hands-on. That's impressive, Etcher. He paused, recalibrated, smiled. At this stage of things, Sophie beamed beside him. She thought it was a compliment. I ordered the veal, ate it slowly, and said very little for the rest of the meal. A man who talks too much at a first meeting has already told you what he came to find out. A man who goes quiet is still listening. By the time we said goodnight in the parking lot, I had a short list forming in the back of my mind. It wasn't evidence. It was the particular discomfort of a man who's been in business long enough to know when someone is performing interest instead of feeling it. I drove home and sat in the kitchen until midnight. My wife's photograph was on the counter, the one from our 25th anniversary where she was laughing because I dropped the cake. I looked at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called my old friend Gerald, who spent 20 years with the Columbus PD before he retired and started consulting. We'd known each other since our kids played Little League together. I didn't explain everything. I just said, I need someone looked at, someone my daughter is serious about. Gerald didn't ask me if I was sure. That's why I called him. He said, give me a name and 2 weeks. I gave him the name that same night. The 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I went to work. I reviewed contracts, approved a large shipment to a hotel renovation project in Indianapolis, had dinner with Sophie twice and listened to her talk about Nathan the way young people talk about things they believe are permanent. She'd met his sister. She loved his apartment. He'd suggested they look at houses in the spring. Houses in the spring. I smiled and passed the bread basket and said nothing. Gerald called me on a Wednesday morning, 11 days in. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who'd found what he was looking for and wished he hadn't. You need to come to my office, he said. Not the phone. I was there in 40 minutes. Gerald's office smelled like old coffee and the particular staleness of a room where serious things get said. He had a folder on the desk, thick, the edges worn from handling. He slid it across without preamble. Nathan Briggs isn't his original name. He was born Nathan Briggs Kowalski, dropped the last name in 2017. 2 previous engagements, 1 marriage. I opened the folder. The marriage was to a woman named Patricia Odom in Nashville, Tennessee. 2019. Divorced, 2021. Patricia had owned a small chain of 3 florist shops that her family had built over 40 years. By the time the divorce was finalized, the flagship location had been sold, one of the others had closed, and Patricia had a settlement that gave her just enough to start over but nothing more. Gerald watched me read. The first engagement, he said, was to a woman in Cincinnati, Rebecca Marsh. Her family owned a plumbing supply company. They got engaged. Her father got suspicious. She broke it off. He moved to Nashville about 6 weeks later. What did he do for work, I asked. That's the interesting part. He calls himself a business development consultant. He has a website, a LinkedIn, 2 client testimonials that both trace back to LLCs that don't appear to have any other web presence. He's not a consultant. He's a parasite with a business card. I sat in Gerald's office for almost an hour, going through the documents. Patricia Odom's divorce filings were public record. The pattern was plain. Rapid courtship, engagement before the family could form clear opinions, pressure to integrate himself into the business under the cover of partnership and love, then slow-motion demolition from the inside, bad vendors, inflated consulting fees paid to connections of his, agreements that looked like opportunities until they weren't. Patricia had written in her divorce deposition that she'd felt like she was losing her mind for 6 months before she understood what was happening, that she'd watched her father's business fall apart and believed, until nearly the end, that Nathan was trying to help fix it. I closed the folder. Gerald leaned back. What are you going to do? The same thing I always do, I said. Build something he can't get through. I drove to Sophie's apartment that evening with the casserole dish and no plan to show her the folder yet. I needed to understand how deep this had gone. She was on the phone when I knocked, laughing, and the sound of her laugh through the door made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't explain. She let me in, finished the call, kissed me on the cheek, and set the table with the easy comfort of someone who learned domestic rhythms from watching me and her mother do it for 25 years. We ate. She talked about Nathan. He's been looking at the business with me, she said, spooning out green beans like it was nothing. Just casually. He has great instincts for where we might be leaving money on the table. I kept my voice even. What kind of looking? Oh, we talked about the distribution model. He thinks we might be underpricing some of the specialty stone lines. He might be right about that, I said. I'll have to think about it. She smiled. He'd love to talk to you about it. He really respects what you've built. I bet he does. That night I called my attorney, a woman named Claire Hutchins, who'd handled every significant contract I'd signed for the past 15 years. I told her I needed 2 things: a prenuptial agreement drafted as comprehensively as Ohio law permitted, and a corporate governance review that would formalize the ownership and succession structure of Calloway Tile and Stone in a way that made unilateral changes to ownership impossible without board approval. She was quiet for a moment. How fast? As fast as you can move without cutting corners. Consider it started. The harder conversation came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks before Nathan had apparently told Sophie he was planning to propose. I knew this because Gerald had a contact who'd seen him at a jewelry store in the short north asking questions that weren't casual browsing. I had to move. I called Sophie and asked if she'd come to the house. Said I wanted to talk about the business succession plan. Frame it as a family meeting. She brought Nathan. I hadn't planned for that. I adjusted. We sat in the living room, the one with the fireplace her mother had picked out and the rug we'd bought in Savannah on a trip that seems 100 years ago now. Nathan sat with his arm along the back of Sophie's chair, proprietary, the way men sit when they've decided something is already theirs. I told them I'd been working with Claire on formalizing the corporate structure. Standard practice for businesses at our scale, I said. Protects everyone, including future family members. Nathan's arm didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. Sophie said, "That makes sense, Dad. What does it change?" "Mostly governance. Major decisions, ownership transfers, equity changes, new partnerships require approval from a three-person advisory board going forward. Myself, Gerald Marsh, and Tom Riley. She knew both names. They'd been at our Christmas party for 15 years. Nathan smiled. Sounds thorough. Any reason for the timing? Growing company, I said. Responsible planning. He nodded. The smile didn't change, but I could see him recalculating. 3 days later, Sophie called me sounding confused. Nathan wants to know more about the advisory board structure. He asked if there's a way for future family members to have a seat. Not in the current bylaws, I said. Maybe someday. How are you two doing otherwise? She paused. Great. Really great. He's been a little stressed about work lately. I bet he has. The proposal happened 2 weeks later. Sophie called me crying, happy, the way she used to call after good things happened. And I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and let her talk and told her I was happy for her, because part of me was. Part of me has never stopped wanting good things for her. That part doesn't disappear just because you've seen the folder. She asked me to have dinner with them to celebrate. I went. I ordered the fish, watched Nathan watch me, and smiled like a man with nothing to worry about. He was already trying to find the gap in the wall. I could see him looking for it. The wedding was set for June, at a restored farmhouse venue outside of Columbus that Sophie had wanted since she was 22 and saw it in a magazine. 200 guests, string lights and wildflowers, and the kind of late spring afternoon that Ohio produces about 4 times a year when it's trying to apologize for February. I stood at the back of the church 6 months after that dinner with Gerald and watched my daughter walk toward a man I knew was going to try to take everything the moment the ceremony ended. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket during the processional. I almost ignored it. I had it on vibrate out of habit, and the sound system was playing something that made ignoring everything else feel natural. But something made me glance down. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Watched Sophie reach the altar. Watched Nathan take her hands with that practiced warmth he wore like a suit jacket. When the officiant began speaking, I slipped out a side door into the hallway. I played the voicemail. The voice was a woman's. Measured, careful, with the particular cadence of someone who had rehearsed exactly what to say. Mr. Calloway, my name is Patricia. Patricia Odom. I was married to the man your daughter. Just married. I know this is the worst possible moment. I'm sorry for that. But I couldn't let this happen to another family without at least trying. Please call me when you can. I have things you need to see. I stood in that hallway for 45 seconds, maybe longer. Then I typed one word back to the number, tomorrow. I returned to the ceremony, said everything the father of the bride is supposed to say, danced with Sophie to the song we'd agreed on 6 months earlier, the one her mother had loved. Watched Nathan charm the room with the ease of a man who had done this before, which of course he had. Once across the reception hall, he caught my eye and raised his glass. I raised mine. We both knew what we were doing. Patricia Odom met me at a diner in Grandview Heights the next morning. She was 51 years old, with careful eyes and the steady composure of someone who had survived something and decided that surviving it was not enough. She brought a bag. Inside the bag was a folder thicker than Gerald's. She spread it on the table between the coffee cups. He starts with the business conversation within the first 2 months, she said. Every time. He frames it as interest, as love, as partnership. My father built our shop over 40 years. Nathan spent 8 months convincing me that fresh eyes would help us grow. By the time I understood what fresh eyes actually meant, we'd signed agreements with 3 vendors he'd introduced, all of whom were either connected to him directly or were simply bad actors he'd sourced through people he knew. Our costs went up. Our quality went down. 2 of our wholesale clients walked. She put a photograph on the table. Nathan, younger, at what I recognized as a trade show, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. That's his contact, she said. He goes by different names in different contexts. but he's the one Nathan uses to source the bad vendors. He's used him at least twice that I can document. She had emails, texts sent to a friend of Nathan's that had been recovered during discovery in the divorce proceedings. One of them, sent 4 months into their marriage, read, "She's starting to push back on the Martinez account. Need to move faster. Can you get the Denton contracts ready to propose next week?" The Denton contracts, she explained, were with a flooring supplier who invoiced at 30% above market rate and was owned by a shell company she had never been able to fully trace. "Do you know who Denton is?" I asked. Her expression answered before she did. "No, but Nathan does. I photographed every document she had. We sat in that diner for 2 hours. When I left, I told her I was going to need her to be willing to talk to an attorney. She said she'd already talked to 3, and she would talk to 100 more if it meant this stopped with Sophie. She's a good woman, Patricia Odom, the kind of person who gets hurt by people like Nathan, because she trusts that the warmth she shows the world will be met with warmth in return. It's not naivety, it's just decency. And decency is the thing predators understand exactly well enough to weaponize. I drove to Claire Hutchins' office from the diner without stopping. She reviewed the documents while I drank bad office coffee and looked out the window at a parking lot. "The prenup protects marital assets," she said. Same thing she told me before. "But if he gets your daughter to make him a partner in the business through her own decision, through what looks like a loving choice, that's separate." "That's corporate law, I know," I said. "What do? We made sure the corporate structure makes that impossible without triggering a full board review and a 30-day comment period. And we document everything from this point forward. Every suggestion he makes about the business, every vendor he mentions, every meeting where he's present." Claire had the governance documents finalized within a week. The advisory board was formally constituted. Tom Riley, who'd helped me land our first major hotel contract back in 2004, and Gerald, who didn't need explaining. Every meaningful business decision now required 2 of 3 board votes. Sophie retained her inheritance rights in full. Nathan Briggs had exactly 0 pathway into the ownership structure without an act of board approval that I could stop in my sleep. The prenuptial agreement was 42 pages. Nathan signed it at a kitchen table, signing that his attorney apparently spent 40 minutes advising him against. He signed anyway, which I'd expected. Men like Nathan sign prenups because they don't intend for them to be the mechanism of their defeat. They have other plans. His first move came 6 weeks into the marriage. Sophie called on a Tuesday. Her voice had the particular quality of someone relaying a message they half believed themselves. "Nathan thinks there's a company that could really help us optimize the specialty stone division," she said. "A logistics consultant. He's already had a preliminary call with them." "What's the company called?" She gave me the name. I gave it to Gerald that afternoon. It took him 48 hours to trace the LLC back to a holding company in Nevada that had been incorporated 6 months before Nathan and Sophie got engaged. He'd built it before he even put a ring on her finger. I called Claire. She started a file. I didn't tell Sophie yet. I needed more thread before I could show her the whole cloth. The next 3 months were a careful, grinding kind of patience I hadn't known I was capable of. Nathan made 2 more suggestions. One vendor introduction that Gerald traced to the same Nevada holding company through a different intermediary. One meeting request with a development firm that wanted to discuss buying out our Indianapolis distribution rights, which would have cost us a recurring revenue stream worth roughly $400,000 annually. I declined the meeting through Sophie with the politeness of a man who had no idea what he was declining. I had Patricia's documents. I had Gerald's traces. I had Claire's corporate structure, which Nathan had apparently realized was more fortified than he'd anticipated. Because Sophie mentioned twice in passing that he seemed frustrated, he couldn't learn more about how the board decisions were made. He was looking for the gap. There wasn't one. The moment I'd been building toward came on a Sunday in early October. Sophie called me from their house, and her voice was different. Quieter. The particular quiet of someone who has started to wonder, Dad, she said. Nathan got a call last night from someone. He went outside to take it, and when he came back, he was different, distracted. He said it was a client, but I checked the number this morning and I can't find any record of it anywhere. Is that, am I being paranoid? You're not being paranoid, I said. Can you come to the house tonight? Bring whatever you're comfortable bringing. She came alone. I had the folder on the kitchen table, Gerald's report, Patricia's documents, Claire's notes on the vendor traces, the email from Nathan's divorce proceedings. She's starting to push back. Need to move faster. Sophie sat across from me and read for a long time. I did not say I told you so. I did not say anything about the dinner months ago, when I'd first tried and she'd shut me down. I let her read. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, but her hands were not steady. How long have you known? Since before the wedding, I said. I wasn't sure how to reach you. I tried too early once, and it pushed you away. I decided to build the protection first and let you find your way to the truth yourself. She nodded slowly. The Denton thing. The Nevada LLC. It's a pattern, I said. Patricia Odom is willing to talk to you directly if you want to hear it from someone who lived it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to talk to your attorney. We met with Claire the next morning, all three of us. By the end of that week, Sophie had filed for legal separation. Claire had submitted a petition for annulment in Franklin County on grounds of fraudulent inducement, supported by 47 pages of evidence, Patricia Odom's sworn statement, Gerald's investigative documentation, and the Nevada LLC filings that showed premeditated intent to infiltrate the business. Nathan's attorney called 3 days later. Claire's response was brief: no settlement. If he continued to contest, we would pursue criminal fraud charges and refer the Nevada LLC documentation to the state attorney general's office for review of potential wire fraud. We didn't hear from Nathan's attorney again. The annulment was granted on a Thursday afternoon in November. Judge Harold Stanton read his ruling from the bench with the measured cadence of a man who had seen enough human behavior to be unsurprised but not indifferent. He noted the documented pattern of prior conduct, the premeditated business research conducted before the relationship began, the respondent's own written communications establishing clear deceptive intent, and granted the petition in full. No marital assets transferred. Marriage declared void. Nathan Briggs left Ohio within 2 weeks. Gerald tracked his departure without being asked. Old habits. Sophie didn't come to the hearing. She spent that week at the house, in her old room, sleeping late in a way she hadn't since she was a teenager, eating soup I made and watching the kind of movies that don't require much. I didn't push her to talk. I cooked and I sat nearby and I let her come to me when she was ready. She came to me on a Wednesday evening, sat at the kitchen table the same way she had as a child when something had happened at school. I made tea. I keep going back to the beginning, she said, trying to find the moment I should have known. You won't find it, I said. He's been doing this long enough that he knows exactly how to make the beginning feel real. I feel stupid. You're not stupid. You're someone who loved a person who turned out not to exist. That's grief. It's different from stupid. She turned her mug in her hands. I should have listened to you, she said. I should have found a better way to reach you, I said. That's on me, too. She looked up at me. You really believe that? I really believe that. She nodded. Something in her face settled. Recovery moved the way it does when the wound is real. Not in a straight line, not on any schedule, but forward on balance. She went back to her apartment in December. She started running again, the half marathons she'd let slide. She threw herself into the specialty stone division that Nathan had tried to use as an entry point, and she was good at it. Genuinely good, in the way that sometimes takes adversity to surface. By February, she was proposing an expansion of the specialty line into a partnership with an architectural firm in Cincinnati. The numbers were clean, the relationship legitimate, the instincts sharp. I approved it in about 4 minutes, She laughed when I told her. In March, she asked if she could bring someone to Sunday dinner. A man she'd met through the half-marathon community, a physical therapist named Owen who, she mentioned almost as an afterthought, had suggested they take things slow. I like him already, I said. She laughed again, the loud one, the one that belongs to her. Owen shook my hand at the door on a Sunday evening in late March and asked me, genuinely, how the tile business worked. Not the financial architecture of it, not the revenue structure, just how it worked, how the stone got from the quarry to the floor. What I found interesting about it after 31 years. We stood in the kitchen talking about travertine for 20 minutes before Sophie pulled us toward the table. I watched him at dinner. He looked at Sophie the way her mother used to look at things she loved, with full attention, no agenda, no performance. He laughed at her jokes. He deferred to her on the things she knew better. He forgot, twice, to circle back to me. That's the tell I trust. The ones who are after something never forget about you. After dinner, Sophie and Owen took a walk, and I stood at the kitchen window watching the street go quiet in the way it does in Ohio in early spring, when winter has finally decided to mean it. I thought about what it cost to build something over 31 years. The early mornings, the bad contracts, the winter the warehouse furnace died and we had to move inventory by hand in the cold. Her mother bringing sandwiches to the warehouse on a Saturday because she knew I'd forget to eat. The photograph on the counter. I thought about Nathan Briggs driving away from Ohio with nothing. I thought about Sophie coming down to breakfast that morning in her old socks, the ridiculous ones with the cartoon avocados, moving around the kitchen like she owned it, because she had once, and she was finding her way back. I'm 63 years old. I've made a lot of things with my hands, and I've made a few things with my patience and my stubbornness and my refusal to stop when the situation required stopping. The business is one of them. My daughter is the other. Not made, that's wrong. She made herself. I just made sure there was something standing when she needed it. That's the job. That's always been the job. The tile business is still in Columbus, Ohio. Sophie runs the specialty stone division now and is better at it than I was. The advisory board still meets quarterly. Gerald drinks too much coffee and Tom Riley always brings store-bought cookies that nobody eats but everyone thanks him for. Patricia Odom called last spring to say she'd reopened one of her flower shops. She sent Sophie an arrangement when the Cincinnati partnership launched. White peonies, no note, just her name. Sophie kept them on her desk until they were gone. Nathan Briggs has not been heard from since Ohio. I hope, somewhere, someone is watching out for whoever he finds next. I hope they built their walls before he knocked. If this story reached you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me what time it is where you are. I read every one. And if you want to hear the next story, it's right there waiting. Thank you for listening. I've thought a lot about what actually stopped Nathan Briggs. Not the annulment, not the 47 pages of evidence, or Claire's two-word reply to his attorney. What stopped him was something he built himself, without realizing it. Every move he made, the too early business questions, the vendor introductions, the Nevada LLC he set up 6 months before he even proposed, each one left a mark. He was meticulous about his plan and careless about his trail, because men like Nathan believe their charm is so complete that no one will ever look closely enough to follow it backward. That belief is the thing that undoes them, not the law, not a father's suspicion, their own certainty that they've already won. I'm not a philosophical man by nature. I run a tile business. I think in supply chains and margins and whether the travertine shipment is going to clear Indiana by Thursday. But I've lived long enough to understand that what you do accumulates. It doesn't disappear. Nathan spent years practicing deception, and the practice made him precise but also predictable. Patricia recognized the pattern because she'd survived it. Gerald recognized it because he'd spent 2 decades watching what people do when they think no one is paying attention. I recognized it because I'd spent 31 years learning to read the difference between someone who wants to build something and someone who wants to take something someone else already built. The thing about integrity is that it compounds the same way dishonesty does, just in the opposite direction. Sophie built her judgment over 31 years of watching her mother and me move through the world, the way we tried to, honestly, carefully, without cutting corners that mattered. That foundation didn't protect her from Nathan's opening moves. Nothing would have. He was skilled. But it's what let her sit at that kitchen table in October, read those documents, and recognize the truth without needing me to explain it. She got there herself. That matters more than anything I did with the prenup, or the board structure, or the paper trail Gerald assembled. I think about what I'd say to her now, knowing how it all came out. I don't think I'd say anything different than what I said in the kitchen the night she came over with her questions. You're not stupid. You loved someone who turned out not to exist. That's grief, not failure. The failure would have been refusing to look at the evidence when it was on the table in front of you. Sophie didn't refuse. She read every page. That took more courage than anything I did, because I was angry and she was heartbroken, and heartbreak is harder to think through than anger. Resilience isn't toughness. I used to think it was. I thought it meant not getting knocked down, or getting up fast when you did. I don't think that anymore. I think it means being willing to stay honest with yourself in the moments when honesty costs the most. When Sophie sat at my kitchen table and read those pages, she was paying that cost. And when she showed up 2 months later with the Cincinnati proposal and numbers that were cleaner than anything I'd have drafted at her age, that was the return on it. Nathan drove out of Ohio with nothing. Sophie runs the specialty stone division now, and she's better at it than I ever was. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when the wrong thing fails and the right thing holds. I built walls. She built the rest.